In 1971, during demolition work on a property in Colleton County, South Carolina, construction workers discovered something that should have stayed buried. Behind a false wall in what had once been a grand plantation house, they found a journal. Leather-bound, water-stained, its pages covered in handwriting so meticulous it looked like calligraphy. The journal detailed 40 years of ritualistic murders, 13 prominent men gathering in darkness to commit atrocities they believed strengthened the land through blood sacrifice. Names, dates, descriptions of ceremonies where victims were not just killed, but consumed. The journal documented at least 37 deaths between 1800 and 1841, though the true number was likely higher. Most victims were enslaved people who disappeared without anyone asking questions. But the journal also recorded something else, a conspiracy that ended in fire, a night when 13 men died screaming in a cellar while the plantation burned above them. When county officials tried to investigate, the journal vanished from records within a week. Some say it was destroyed. Others believe descendants of those 13 families took it to protect their ancestors' reputations. But whispers persist. Stories told in communities descended from enslaved people about the plantation heiress who went mad, the enslaved man who sought revenge, and the night justice finally came to men who thought themselves untouchable. This is the story of Catherine Rutledge, how a woman dismissed as insane became the architect of the most devastating act of resistance in South Carolina history, how she allied with an enslaved man whose family was destroyed by her father, and how together they orchestrated the massacre of 13 elite men who believed their wealth and power made them invincible. Before we reveal what really happened in that cellar, subscribe to the Sins of Humanity and drop your location in the comments. I want to know where people who refuse to let these stories be forgotten are watching from. April 1841, Colleton County sat in South Carolina's low country, where the Combahee River moved slowly through land that had made fortunes through rice cultivation and human suffering. Spanish moss hung from live oak trees like funeral shrouds. The air was thick with humidity that made breathing feel like work. This was wealth built on systematic cruelty, prosperity extracted from generations of enslaved people who worked from dawn until darkness in flooded rice fields, their bodies breaking down by their 30s, their life expectancy half that of their enslavers. The county's elite operated with absolute confidence in their power. They owned thousands of acres, hundreds of slaves, controlled every judge, every sheriff, every aspect of local government. They married each other's daughters, went into business together, protected each other's secrets. And 13 of them belonged to something they called the Brethren of the Harvest, a secret society that mixed European occult traditions with beliefs borrowed and twisted from African spiritual practices. They gathered every 6 weeks to perform rituals they convinced themselves justified their dominance. Rituals that required blood. Silas Rutledge was desperately trying to join their inner circle. He owned Cypress Grove Plantation, 800 acres of moderately productive land, worked by 58 enslaved people. He was wealthy by most standards, but in Colleton County's hierarchy he was barely mid-tier. The truly powerful families summered in Charleston, sent their children to universities in the north, had their names on buildings and streets. Silas wanted that recognition. He wanted to matter. And the Brethren offered a path to power if he was willing to prove his commitment through increasingly monstrous acts. His obsession had cost him his wife Elizabeth, who died giving birth to their only child in 1813. It cost him any semblance of normal family life, and it was about to cost him his daughter. Catherine Rutledge was 28 years old in April 1841, though she looked a decade older. Her body was swollen, weighing nearly 260 pounds, not from overeating but from years of medications prescribed by doctors who diagnosed her with hysteria and female nervous disorders. Mercury compounds that poisoned her system, laudanum that kept her in a constant fog, bloodletting that left her weak and anemic. She suffered violent fits where she screamed and threw objects. She had attacked her father with a letter opener the previous year, leaving a scar across his hand that he told people came from a gardening accident. The white society of Colleton County whispered about Catherine with false sympathy. Poor Silas Rutledge, burdened with a mad daughter. Such a shame. She had been such a pretty child. What they did not know was that Catherine's madness was not madness at all. It was a rational response to witnessing something at age 12 that shattered her understanding of the world. something her father had spent 16 years trying to make her forget through drugs and gaslighting and institutionalized abuse disguised as medical treatment. The letter that would change everything arrived on April 7th, delivered by private courier. Silas opened it in his study, expecting routine business correspondence. Instead, he found 3 pages on expensive paper, sealed with red wax bearing a symbol he recognized immediately. A scythe crossed with wheat stalks, the mark of the brethren. The letter was direct. Silas was in debt, $12,000 borrowed over years of gambling losses and failed investments. An impossible sum. Repayment would require selling most of his land and all his enslaved people, destroying everything he had built. But the brethren offered an alternative, a demonstration of commitment from members in difficult positions. Silas would take his daughter Catherine and place her under the complete authority of one of his enslaved men, not temporarily, not as punishment. As a genuine transfer of responsibility lasting 1 full year, the enslaved man would have total control over her daily activities, her treatment, her person. Silas would announce this publicly at a gathering of the county's prominent families, explaining it as an extreme medical measure for Catherine's condition. The humiliation would be absolute. In a society where white women were supposedly precious and protected above all others, Silas would be declaring his daughter worth less than his property. But if he agreed, his debt would be forgiven, and the brethren would provide financial support to restore his position. Silas sat in his study for hours that night, weighing his options. Bankruptcy would destroy him completely. The brethren had connections to every judge, every lawyer, every politician in the region. They could make problems disappear, including people who became inconvenient, or he could sacrifice his daughter's dignity to maintain his own position. Property over people. Power over morality. The choice that society had trained him to make his entire life. He wrote his acceptance by candlelight and sent it before dawn. 3 days later, another letter arrived with a name and brief history. Ezekiel Cross, age 33, purchased recently through an intermediary from a Virginia plantation. Skills included carpentry and herbal medicine. Temperament listed as quiet and obedient. What the letter did not say was that Ezekiel Cross had been selected specifically for this purpose, that his placement at Cypress Grove was no accident, that he carried his own burning need for justice and the patience to wait for exactly the right moment. Ezekiel arrived on April 13th in a wagon driven by a slave trader named Henderson. The wagon pulled directly to the main house, unusual since most slave transactions happen near the barns or work areas. Silas came out onto the porch, shading his eyes against the morning sun that cut through the humidity like a blade. In the wagon bed sat Ezekiel. The first thing Silas noticed was his eyes. Most enslaved people kept their gaze down as a survival mechanism, an automatic response to decades of brutality for perceived disrespect. But Ezekiel looked directly at Silas, his expression calm and assessing. It made Silas deeply uncomfortable in a way he could not quite articulate. Ezekiel was tall, perhaps 6'2", with broad shoulders and lean muscle from a lifetime of hard labor. His skin was unmarked by whipping scars, which was unusual. His clothes were simple but clean. His hands were large and calloused, but his fingers had a precision that suggested skilled work rather than just brute force. There was an intelligence in his bearing that most enslavers would have beaten out of him years ago. Henderson climbed down and handed papers to Silas. Ezekiel Cross, as requested. Previous owner said he was quiet but capable. Your associates want you to know this one was carefully selected for your purposes. Silas barely glanced at the papers. He addressed Ezekiel directly. You understand why you are here? Yes, sir. Ezekiel's voice was deep and measured with a slight Virginia accent. My daughter is unwell. You will be responsible for her care. Doctors have failed. You claim knowledge of herbal treatments. My grandmother was a healer, sir. She taught me before I was sold south. The transaction completed quickly. Ezekiel was shown to a small cabin near the main house, separate from the other slave quarters. He was given basic supplies and told his duties would begin the next day. He was informed that his sole responsibility was Catherine's care and that failure would have severe consequences. Ezekiel nodded and said, "Yes, sir," when required. Then he was left alone. For the first time since arriving, he allowed his expression to change. His jaw unclenched slightly. His shoulders relaxed. He sat on the narrow bed and pulled from inside his shirt a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a piece of worn paper with 3 names written in a child's uncertain handwriting. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, his wife. His son, his daughter, sold away from him 3 years ago to a plantation in Alabama known for working slaves to death in cotton fields that produced extraordinary yields and extraordinary mortality rates. He had learned through the underground network of communication between plantations that they all died within 18 months. Sarah from untreated fever, Benjamin from an injury that turned septic, Ruth from simply giving up, a 6-year-old child who stopped eating because she could not understand why her family had been torn apart, and Silas Rutledge had been the one to sell them. Not because he needed money, not because they had done anything wrong, but because he had been demonstrating to the brethren that he could make hard decisions without sentimentality, that he valued property over people, power over mercy. He had split a family like kindling for burning, and he smiled when he did it. Ezekiel had spent 2 years working his way south, deliberately getting sold from plantation to plantation, always gathering information. He learned about the brethren through whispers in slave quarters. He learned about their rituals, their members, their belief that they were above any consequence. When the opportunity came to be sold to Rutledge specifically, Ezekiel knew this was his chance. He would have access to Rutledge's house, to his secrets, to his vulnerabilities. And sometimes justice came not from courts or laws, but from patience and planning and being willing to become exactly as monstrous as necessary. He folded the paper with the 3 names and tucked it away. Then he lay back on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, beginning to plan what came next. His first day began on April 14th. A house slave named Judith, middle-aged with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much, brought him to Catherine's room on the 2nd floor. She knocked reluctantly on the heavy door. "Miss Catherine, your father has brought someone to help with your treatments." A crash from inside. Something heavy hitting the wall. Then Catherine's voice, slurred but venomous. "I do not want more treatments. Send him away." Judith looked at Ezekiel with sympathy. "She has bad days. This is one of them." Ezekiel opened the door and stepped inside, closing it before Judith could follow. The room was large but dark, heavy curtains drawn against the daylight. The air was stale, smelling of unwashed bedding and something else, the sweet rotting smell of mercury poisoning. Books were scattered across the floor. A shattered picture frame lay against the wall. Clothes everywhere. The room of someone who had given up on maintaining appearances. Catherine sat in a chair by the cold fireplace, wrapped in a stained dressing gown. Her dark hair hung loose and tangled past her shoulders. Her face was puffy, eyes unfocused. Her hands trembled continuously on the chair arms, a side effect of long-term mercury exposure. She looked at Ezekiel with confusion, then fear, then anger cycling through her expression. "Who are you?" I said, "No more doctors." "I am not a doctor, miss. My name is Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help you." "Help?" She laughed harshly. "That is what they all say. Help, treatment, medicine. They mean poison. They mean chains. They mean silence." She stood suddenly, swaying. "I know what this is. He is punishing me again, for remembering, for speaking, for refusing to forget." Ezekiel stood still, keeping his posture non-threatening. "What are you supposed to forget?" The question caught her off guard. Her anger flickered to something more vulnerable. "You do not know?" "I know nothing, miss. Only that your father says you are unwell." Catherine studied him intently, as if really seeing him for the first time. "For you are not from here." "Virginia originally, miss. Do you know what happens in this house? What they do in the cellar?" Ezekiel's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "I do not know what you mean." "Liar, no heat in it. Just exhaustion. Everyone lies. It is easier than truth." She sat heavily. "Leave me alone. Tell my father his newest torment failed." But Ezekiel moved to the window and drew open the curtains. Sunlight flooded in. Catherine cried out, covering her eyes with her hands. "When did you last go outside, miss?" "I cannot walk that far. I am too weak." "When did you last eat without laudanum?" "The medicine is necessary." "Doctors say so." "What if the doctors are wrong?" Her hands came down from her eyes. She stared at him with a mixture of hope and terror. "What did you say?" Ezekiel turned from the window. This was the moment. The first card played. "I said, what if the doctors are wrong? What if everything you have been told about your condition is designed not to help you but to keep you controllable? What if your father has been poisoning you for years to ensure you never become well enough to speak about what you saw?" Absolute silence. Catherine's eyes went wide. Her trembling hands stilled for the first time since he had entered. For 30 seconds she just sat there, her mind working through implications. When she spoke, her voice was different, clearer. "He told you." "Your father told me nothing, miss. But I have eyes. I know mercury poisoning. I know long-term laudanum use. I know what withdrawal looks like. Healthy women do not become like this without someone working very hard to make them that way." "Why would you say this?" Suspicion crept back into her voice. "This is a trick. You are testing me to see if I am still delusional. I am telling you I can help you become truly well, clear-minded, strong enough to walk out of this room. But it will not be easy. Your body has been dependent on those medicines for years. Stopping will be painful. You will feel worse before you feel better. And your father will not approve. Then why would you do it?" Ezekiel met her eyes. "Because I have my own reasons for wanting Silas Rutledge to suffer. And the best way to make him suffer is to give him back a daughter who is sane enough to remember everything and strong enough to speak about it. The truth, dangerous to speak so plainly." But Catherine was damaged, not stupid. She would see through manipulation, but genuine common cause that she might believe. "You want revenge on my father?" "Yes, miss." "What did he do to you?" "He sold my family, my wife and 2 children, sent them to their deaths for no reason except to prove something to people who judge worth by cruelty." Catherine absorbed this, then nodded slowly. "The brethren. He sold them for the brethren, not a question." "The brethren, miss? You do not know." She laughed, something manic in it. "You will learn. Everyone learns eventually." She leaned forward. "If I agree, if I let you help me, what happens then?" "You get well, miss. And when you are well, we decide what to do next. I have my revenge to plan. You have yours. Perhaps they align." Catherine studied him intently. Finally she spoke, her voice dropping to something cold and certain. "I want them all dead. My father, Judge Pelham, Reverend Crenshaw. All of them. Every man who stood in that cellar. I want them to suffer first. To know it is coming, to beg. Then I want them dead." The venom was shocking, not for its intensity, but because it came from someone dismissed as mad and harmless. This was not madness. This was rage concentrated by years of suppression, refined into something sharp and deadly. Ezekiel nodded. "Then we have an understanding, Miss Catherine. If we are conspirators, use my name." "I cannot, miss. Not where anyone might hear. We must be careful." "Then know something, Ezekiel." Catherine's eyes glittered dangerously. "I have killed before. 3 people, house slaves who might have told my father about my lucid moments. I cannot remember exactly how. The laudanum blurs everything. But I know I did it. They disappeared. Their families were told they ran away." She smiled terribly. "So if you plan to betray me, to use me and then dispose of me, know that I am not a victim. I am something worse." Ice ran down Ezekiel's spine. He had expected an ally. He had not expected someone whose capacity for violence might exceed his own. But he kept his voice steady. "I believe you, miss, and I will not betray you." "Good." Catherine stood more steadily this time. "Then let us begin. But I have one condition. When this is over, when we have had our revenge, I want to die. I do not want to live with what I have seen and done. You will help me with that too." "Agreed." Ezekiel had not expected that request, but he was committed now. "Agreed. Then we have a deal." Catherine extended her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Ezekiel shook it. Her grip was stronger than he expected. Over the following week, Ezekiel began Catherine's treatment in earnest. He gradually reduced her laudanum doses, replacing some of it with herbal tinctures he prepared himself. Valerian root for anxiety and sleep, chamomile for digestive distress, milk thistle to help her liver process accumulated toxins. He stopped the mercury compounds entirely, despite her doctor's written instructions to continue them indefinitely. The process was brutal. Catherine spent 3 days in bed with fever, shaking and violent vomiting. Her body was purging years of poison, and it fought every step. Ezekiel stayed with her through it, holding a basin while she was sick, wiping her face with cool cloths, speaking quietly just to remind her she was not alone. When she begged for laudanum to make it stop, he refused, and she cursed him with language that would have shocked the society ladies who pitied her. But when the worst of the withdrawal passed, she was weak but clearer than she had been in years. The constant tremor in her hands decreased. Her speech became less slurred. She could focus on reading for more than a few minutes at a time. Her eyes, which had been perpetually unfocused, sharpened with intelligence that had been suppressed for 16 years. Then the real work began. Ezekiel had her walking short distances at first, from her room to the hallway's end and back. It exhausted her, but he insisted, every day, a little further. He adjusted her diet, bringing lean meats and vegetables instead of the heavy pastries and rich foods she had been using for comfort. He limited portions strictly, though she fought him. Years of using food as her only source of pleasure made restriction difficult. If that detail about Catherine's systematic recovery sends chills down your spine, hit that like button. Because what they discovered next would make her personal suffering look insignificant compared to the horrors hidden beneath Cypress Grove. While working on her physical recovery, they talked. Catherine told him about the cellar, about what she saw when she was 12 years old. She described it in detail that made Ezekiel's stomach turn, but he listened without interruption. She told him about the years of gaslighting that followed, her father convincing everyone, including herself at times, that she was mad, that she invented memories, that nothing she said could be trusted. She told him about the journal she kept hidden, pages documenting dates and times when her father left late at night, names of visitors who arrived at strange hours, sounds from below the house that should not be possible. She had coded everything, making it look like a mad woman's ramblings if discovered, but she knew exactly what each entry meant. Ezekiel told her about his family, about Sarah, who sang while working and taught their children to read despite the danger, about Benjamin, who at 8 could do mathematics that amazed even the overseers, about Ruth, who loved flowers and picked wild blooms to make their cabin beautiful, even when there was barely food to eat. He told her how Silas came to the Virginia plantation with a buyer's warrant, how he inspected them like livestock, checking teeth and muscles, how he agreed to purchase all 3 for a reasonable price, then changed terms at the last moment, saying he only needed the woman and children, not Ezekiel. How he deliberately split the family for no practical reason, but simply because he could, because demonstrating that level of cruelty proved something to the brethren about his character. He smiled when he did it, Ezekiel said quietly. That is what I remember most. My son crying, holding my leg, begging to stay with me. My wife trying to be strong, telling Benjamin to be brave. And your father smiled like it pleased him to cause that pain. Catherine listened with her newly clear eyes. I am sorry. I know sorry is just a word, but I am sorry you suffered because of what my father is. You are not responsible for what he does, miss. No, but I am responsible for what I do next. And I promise you, Ezekiel, he will pay for what he took from you. They will all pay. The formal announcement was scheduled for April 29th. 41 people gathered in the Cypress Grove dining room for what invitations described as an important family announcement. The county's elite arrived in carriages that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Judge Pelham with his wife Eleanor, Reverend Crenshaw with his daughter, Marcus Fanning and his family, Benjamin Lyle from the bank, all the people who mattered in Colleton County society. The meal was elaborate, designed to impress. Oysters brought from the coast, roasted duck with orange glaze, multiple rice dishes prepared in different styles, sweet potatoes candied with molasses, fresh bread, a towering cake for dessert, the kind of meal that required an army of enslaved people working since dawn to prepare, their labor invisible to the guests who consumed their work without thought. Through it all, Catherine sat at her father's right hand. She ate sparingly, spoke when spoken to, but volunteered nothing. She looked better than she had in years, thinner and clearer-eyed, which several guests commented on with false brightness. Such wonderful improvement. You must be so relieved, Silas. Ezekiel served alongside other house slaves, moving quietly through the dining room, refilling glasses, clearing plates. He was invisible to most guests, just another piece of property performing its function. But he listened to every word, watched every interaction, filed away information about who deferred to whom, who held real power versus who merely pretended. After dessert, Silas stood and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted. "My friends, thank you for joining us this evening. As you know, Catherine has been unwell for many years. We tried every treatment available. Doctors from Charleston, a specialist from Philadelphia. Nothing helped. Until recently." He gestured toward Ezekiel, who stood near the wall with a water pitcher. Several guests turned to look at him with curiosity or disdain. 2 weeks ago, I brought in Ezekiel, who has knowledge of herbal medicine passed down from his grandmother. As you can see, Catherine is much improved. Clearer, calmer, more herself than she has been in many years. Polite murmurs around the table. Catherine kept her expression neutral, though Ezekiel saw her hands gripping her napkin beneath the table edge. "This improvement," Silas continued, "has led me to a difficult decision. Catherine requires ongoing care more intensive than our household can normally provide. After much consideration and prayer, I have decided that Ezekiel will assume full responsibility for my daughter's welfare. He will have complete authority over her treatment, her daily activities, and her living arrangements, effective immediately." The murmurs changed tone. Confusion now mixed with shock. Several guests exchanged glances. Mrs. Pelham's face registered something between horror and fascination. Marcus Fanning spoke up, his voice carefully controlled. "Silas, forgive me, but I do not understand. You are placing your daughter under a slave's care. Permanently? I am placing her with someone who succeeded where others failed. My daughter's health is more important than social convention. But surely," Reverend Crenshaw interjected carefully, "there are other options. A companion, a nurse, someone more appropriate." Silas's expression hardened. "I have made my decision." Catherine agrees. "Do you not, daughter?" All eyes turned to Catherine. This was the moment she could refuse, could expose everything, could bring it all crashing down before it even began. Instead, she smiled, small and controlled, revealing nothing. "I trust my father's judgment. Ezekiel has been kind and his treatments help. I am content with this arrangement. Perfectly delivered. Obedient daughter accepting her father's wisdom." But Ezekiel saw what others did not. He saw her knuckles white on that napkin, saw the flash in her eyes promising violence. She was playing the required role, while inside she was screaming. The evening passed in increasingly awkward conversation. Some guests left early, making excuses about the hour or upcoming obligations. Others stayed to speak with Silas privately, asking questions they did not want to be public. Ezekiel caught fragments as he moved through rooms clearing dishes. "Are you certain this is wise? What will people say? The brethren will not approve of this becoming public." That last comment came from Judge Pelham, spoken low near the study door. Silas's response was too quiet to hear, but whatever he said made Pelham nod and clap his shoulder in understanding. By midnight, all guests had departed. Catherine retired to her room. Silas went to his study. Ezekiel helped with cleanup, then made his way upstairs and knocked softly on Catherine's door. "Come in." She sat by the window, still in her dinner dress, looking out at dark grounds visible only as shapes against slightly less dark sky. She did not turn when he entered. "It is done then. I am officially your responsibility. Property of property. How absurd. How are you feeling, miss?" "I want to burn this house down with everyone in it." She turned to look at him. "But we must be patient." "Is that not what you tell me?" "Yes, miss. I agreed to tonight's humiliation because I want them to feel secure. I want them to think this is just my father's eccentricity. I want them to forget about me while we work." She moved to her dresser and pulled out a wooden box. Inside were papers covered in her handwriting, years of documentation. "I have been recording everything I remember. Dates, names, ritual descriptions, all coded so it looks like nonsense if found. But I can decode it. We have enough information to destroy 20 men if anyone would listen to us." "And will anyone believe us, miss? A woman recently recovered from madness and an enslaved man?" "No, which is why we need proof they cannot dismiss. Real physical evidence." She pulled out one specific page covered in symbols and notations. "I know where they keep their records. The Brethren maintains a ledger of all activities, every ritual, every sacrifice, every member's participation recorded in detail. It ensures everyone is equally guilty, so no one can expose the others without destroying themselves. Where is this ledger? In the cellar. There is a hidden room beyond the main chamber. I never saw inside, but I heard them talk about it. That is where they keep everything they cannot afford to lose. Ezekiel felt excitement mixed with dread. Such a ledger would be devastating evidence. But getting it meant going into the heart of the Brethren's domain, into the place where they committed their atrocities. We would need to access it when the house is quiet. When your father is away. He travels to Charleston monthly for business. The next trip is May 14th. He will be gone 3 days. That gives us 2 weeks to prepare. They spent an hour going over details, speaking in whispers even though no one could hear them. Catherine sketched the cellar layout from memory. Ezekiel asked about guards, keys, slave schedules. They planned every step like generals preparing for battle. When he left her room, it was nearly 2 in the morning. He made his way to his small cabin, mind racing with possibilities and dangers. He was fully committed now to conspiracy with a woman who was brilliant and damaged and frightening in equal measure. He pulled out the paper with his family's names and looked at it by candlelight. "I am doing this for you," he whispered. "For Sarah, for Benjamin, for Ruth, for every person who suffered because men like Silas Rutledge believe power gives them the right to destroy lives without consequence." He blew out the candle and lay in darkness, listening to the house settle. Somewhere below, in a cellar he had never seen, were secrets that could tear apart South Carolina's most powerful families. In 2 weeks he would go down there to find them. The 2 weeks passed with deceptive calm. Catherine continued improving. Her weight dropped steadily. Her mind stayed sharp. She walked further each day, building strength. More importantly, she was translating sections of her coded journals for Ezekiel, filling in details about the Brethren that made his blood run cold. Pause for a moment and tell me in the comments, at what point did Colleton County society become complicit in these crimes through their silence? When does looking away become participation in evil? The Brethren was not unique to Colleton County, Catherine explained. It was part of a larger network across the South. Connected societies in Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond. Different names, always the same structure. Wealthy men who believed their power derived from ancient practices of dominance and sacrifice. They believe they continue traditions going back thousands of years, Catherine said one afternoon as they walked the grounds. European mystery cults mixed with things learned from enslaved people. They twisted it all into something monstrous. Justification for acts that have no justification. And the sacrifices? Not always human. Sometimes animals during certain seasons, but other times they take people who will not be missed. Slaves with no family, poor whites who wander onto their properties. Once I heard my father mention a child, but I do not know if that was literal or metaphorical. Where do the bodies go? Swamps. Every plantation has access to swamps. Bodies go in, alligators do the rest. Nature becomes complicit in covering their crimes. And this ledger documents all of it? Every ritual for 40 years, according to what I overheard. Names, dates, detailed descriptions. They keep it because they need mutual complicity. Insurance that no one can turn informant without destroying themselves. May 14th arrived. Silas left for Charleston in early morning, taking his carriage and personal manservant. He would stay with business associates, attend meetings. Expected back evening of May 16th. That gave them almost 3 full days, though they would only need 1 night if everything went according to plan. They waited until nightfall before moving. The house settled into its evening routine. Enslaved people returned to their quarters. House slaves finished their work and retired. By 10 o'clock, the main house was silent except for occasional creaking of old wood settling. They met in Catherine's room. She had changed into simple, dark clothes that allowed freedom of movement, hair pulled back tightly. She looked like someone preparing for battle, not an invalid preparing for a stroll. "Are you certain, miss?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Let us go." The cellar entrance was in the kitchen behind the pantry. The door looked like wall paneling, but pressed in the right place it clicked open, revealing narrow stairs descending into darkness. The smell hit immediately. Damp earth and old smoke and something organic rotting in the darkness below. Catherine noticed his reaction. "You get used to it." I wish I could say you stopped smelling it, but I would be lying. They descended carefully, Ezekiel carrying a shuttered lantern that provided minimal light. The stairs were steep and worn, wood creaking under their weight. After 20 steps, they reached the bottom. The cellar was larger than Ezekiel expected, easily 30 feet square with low ceilings, supported by thick beams. The floor was packed earth. Walls were lined with stones that wept moisture. At the center was what Catherine called the altar, though now it just looked like a heavy wooden table. But dark stains on its surface and grooves carved into its edges told their own story. Around the room were candle holders on iron stands, clay jars sealed with wax, wooden boxes, a rack holding black robes with crimson trim. Along one wall, shelves containing books and papers, some bound in leather, others loose and yellowing. Catherine moved with the certainty of someone following a memorized map. She led Ezekiel to the far wall where stones seemed solid and unbroken. But she pressed one particular stone and something clicked deep in the wall. A section swung inward, revealing another chamber beyond. This room was smaller, perhaps 10 feet square, and here the brethren kept its deepest secrets. The ledger sat on a wooden stand in the center of the room, massive, 2 feet tall and 18 inches wide, bound in dark leather with metal clasps. Next to it were smaller journals, correspondence, documents. Around the walls were shelves containing jars that Ezekiel refused to examine too closely. "There," Catherine whispered, pointing at the ledger. "That is what we need." Ezekiel moved to the stand and opened the book carefully. The pages were thick parchment, covered in meticulous handwriting. Names and dates going back to 1800. Ritual descriptions written in clinical detail, like scientific experiments rather than atrocities. He began reading, and with each entry, his horror deepened. These men had not just committed occasional violence, they had made it systematic. Regular gatherings every 6 weeks, rituals timed to agricultural cycles. They believed blood fed the land, made crops grow stronger, ensured prosperity. They had killed at least 37 people over 40 years, probably more. Mostly enslaved people, but also poor whites, indigenous people, anyone vulnerable and disposable. And there were notes about consumption. They had not just killed. They had eaten pieces of their victims. Specific preparations, specific rituals around the act. They believed it transferred power, that consuming the flesh of their victims strengthened them, bound them together in shared guilt and shared strength. "Dear God," Ezekiel whispered, "this is worse than I imagined. I tried to tell you." Catherine's voice was flat, all emotion burned out years ago. "I watched them when I was 12. I watched them cut pieces from a woman on that altar. I watched my father raise a goblet and drink. Then I spent 16 years being told I was insane, that I imagined it all. But I knew. I always knew." Ezekiel turned pages looking for entries about his family. He found them in October 1838, 3 lines. "Purchase family unit from Virginia. Woman Sarah. Children Benjamin and Ruth. Separated from male to demonstrate resolve to brethren. Sent to Alabama contact. Payment received." 3 lines. That was all his family's destruction merited in their ledger. Property transaction. Demonstration of commitment. Payment received. "We need to take this," Ezekiel said, voice tight with rage, barely controlled. "No." Catherine's hand on his arm. "If we take it now, they will know immediately someone was here. We need to copy the most important entries first. Build our case systematically." She was right, but Ezekiel wanted to burn everything. Wanted to destroy this place and everyone connected to it. But revenge required patience. Required being smarter than the enemy. They spent 3 hours working in that hidden chamber. Catherine had brought paper and ink. She copied entries about specific rituals, focusing on ones naming current members. Ezekiel documented victims, creating a list of names and dates that could potentially be cross-referenced with other records if anyone ever investigated seriously. It was exhausting work, made worse by the content. Several times Ezekiel had to stop, hands shaking too badly to write. Once Catherine left the chamber entirely, overcome by memories. But slowly, methodically, they built their case. Page after page of evidence that could destroy 20 families. They were so focused that neither heard footsteps on the cellar stairs until it was too late. The first indication something was wrong was when light flared in the outer chamber, lantern light much brighter than their single shuttered lamp. Ezekiel looked up sharply, blood going cold. Silas Rutledge stood in the doorway to the inner chamber, flanked by 2 other men. Behind them, at least 4 more figures waited in the main cellar area, all wearing the black robes of the brethren. "I must admit," Silas said calmly, "I am impressed. I did not think you would find the inner chamber. Most members do not know it exists." Catherine stood slowly, placing herself between her father and Ezekiel. "You were supposed to be in Charleston." "I was supposed to be, but I never trusted your miraculous recovery, Catherine. So I made arrangements. I left this morning, yes, but I returned this afternoon and watched the house all evening, waiting to see what you would do." He stepped into the chamber, the 2 men blocking the only exit. "Did you really think I would not anticipate this? That I would not prepare for the possibility you might remember, might seek revenge? You have been poisoning me for 16 years, Catherine said, her voice steady despite everything. "And you expect me to simply accept that?" "I expect you to understand it was necessary. You saw something you should not have when you were a child. You could not understand context. I could not allow you to destroy everything I had built. I was 12 years old and I watched you murder a woman and eat her flesh. That was not fear, Father. That was a reasonable response to witnessing evil." "Evil?" Silas moved further into the room, eyes moving between Catherine and Ezekiel. "Such a simple word for complex realities. And you," he looked at Ezekiel, "using my daughter to get to me, filling her head with ideas of revenge. Very clever." Ezekiel said nothing, calculating distances and odds. 7 men against 1, with Catherine in no condition to fight despite her improvement. The situation looked hopeless. Silas seemed to read his thoughts. "Do not do anything foolish. I do not want to hurt either of you. Not permanently. But I cannot have this rebellion continuing." He gestured to the men behind him. "Bring them upstairs. We need to discuss what happens next." They were taken to Silas's study, a windowless room lined with law books and accounting ledgers. The door was heavy oak, locked from outside. As soon as they were alone, Catherine moved close to Ezekiel. "Are you hurt?" "No, miss. But we are in serious trouble." "Yes, but not as much as you think." She pulled something from inside her dress. "The papers they had been copying. I managed to keep these. He did not search me. Too confident, too certain of his control. That will not help if we are dead. We are not going to die. Not tonight." Catherine's eyes were calculating. "My father will want to resolve this without killing me if possible. I am still his daughter, his blood. That gives us leverage, even if only temporary." Over the next hour, they heard arrivals. Voices in the hall. "Men gathering." The brethren was assembling for an emergency meeting. Finally, the door opened. Marcus Fanning stood there, face grim. "They are ready for you. Come peacefully and you will not be harmed." They were led down to the cellar again. This time, the main chamber had been transformed. All 13 brethren members were present, dressed in their ritual robes. Candles burned in every holder, casting dancing shadows. The altar was draped with crimson cloth. 13 chairs arranged in a perfect circle, all occupied except Silas's seat at the altar's head. Ezekiel and Catherine were positioned in the circle's center, forced to stand facing Silas. The other members watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility to something that looked almost like respect. Silas removed his hood. "Brothers of the Harvest, thank you for coming on such short notice. We face a crisis. My daughter and her associate discovered our inner chamber. They saw the ledger. They were copying entries when I interrupted them." Judge Pelham spoke up, his voice cold. "Then they must be silenced permanently." "This is not complicated, Silas. I disagree. My daughter is blood. I cannot simply dispose of her without exhausting other options. And the man represents an opportunity." "What opportunity?" Reverend Crenshaw asked. "To test something I have long believed, that a person can be drawn into our work through their own actions, if the circumstances are framed correctly." Silas turned to Ezekiel. "You want revenge on me. You want to destroy me for what I did to your family. I understand that desire, but what if I offered you a different kind of revenge? A more meaningful one? I do not understand. I am offering you membership, not as an equal. The Brethren does not accept men of color as full members, but as an associate. You would attend our gatherings, Participate in certain rituals, and in exchange I would give you what you want most. Revenge against the people who killed your family. My family is dead. You cannot give me what I want. No, but I can give you revenge against the plantation owner in Alabama who worked your wife and children to death. His name is Edward Gaines. He is not part of the Brethren. He has no protection from us. If you join us and prove your loyalty, I will give you resources to destroy him. Money, information, connections, whatever you need to make him suffer as you have suffered. The offer hung in the air, obscene in its calculation. Join the men who destroyed his family to get revenge on another monster who finished the job. And if I refuse, then you and Catherine both die tonight. Your bodies go into the swamp. No one will ever know what happened. The papers Catherine was copying will be burned. Her journals destroyed. Everything continues as it always has. Silas spread his hands. But if you accept, you live. Catherine lives. You get your revenge. All it costs is your soul, which you have already proven willing to compromise by conspiring with my daughter. Ezekiel looked at Catherine. Her face was pale, but she gave him the slightest shake of her head. Do not do it. Whatever happens, do not become them. But Ezekiel was thinking about accepting, about getting inside their organization, about gathering more evidence, about buying time. What happens to her? She returns to her room, resumes her medications, forgets what she has seen. The alternative is she dies alongside you. No. Catherine's voice cut across the chamber like a blade. I will not forget again. I will not be silenced. Kill me if you must, Father, but I will not pretend I do not know what you are. Silas's expression hardened. Then you have made your choice. Wait, Ezekiel spoke quickly. I accept your offer. But on one condition. Catherine goes free. Not back to her room, free. Let her leave this house, leave South Carolina. Give her money to start over somewhere far from here. If you do that, I will join you. Several Brethren members shook their heads, but Judge Pelham spoke thoughtfully. The boy makes a point. The girl is already broken in ways that matter. Even if she spoke, who would believe her after years of documented madness? But a man willing to join us to become complicit, that is valuable. That proves our power extends even to those who hate us. Silas considered for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. Very well. Catherine will be sent north. I have associates in Philadelphia who will take her in. She will be given a new identity and a stipend to live on. But she can never return to South Carolina, never contact anyone from her old life. She will be dead to everyone here. Agreed. Catherine stared at Ezekiel. No, I will not leave you to these monsters. Agreed, Ezekiel interrupted. She goes free. I join you. Then we have a bargain. Silas turned to the others. Catherine leaves tomorrow morning. Ezekiel's initiation will be in 3 weeks at our next regular gathering. Until then, he remains at Cypress Grove under constant watch. If he tries to escape or contact anyone outside, the deal is void, and both die. Understood? Ezekiel nodded. Catherine looked like she wanted to argue, to fight, to burn everything down right there. But Ezekiel caught her eye and gave the slightest shake of his head. Trust me. She said nothing. Catherine left the next morning before dawn. A closed carriage took her away, disappearing down the long drive into morning mist. Ezekiel watched from his cabin window. She had not been allowed to say goodbye. He had not been allowed to speak with her after the confrontation in the cellar, but as she had been escorted to her room the previous night, she had looked back at him once, and in her eyes he had seen something that gave him hope. She understood. She knew he had not truly surrendered. She knew this was strategy, not defeat. The question was whether she would actually go to Philadelphia, or whether she had her own plans. The 3 weeks that followed tested Ezekiel's patience and resolve. He was kept under constant watch. 2 overseers followed him everywhere. He was not allowed to leave plantation grounds. He was given menial work to keep him occupied, meaningless tasks that accomplished nothing but filled time. But he was also given access to the main house, to Silas's study, to the cellar where the next gathering would take place. They were watching him, yes, but they were also testing him, seeing if he would try to escape, seeing if he would attempt sabotage. Ezekiel did neither. He played the role of defeated man who had made a pragmatic choice for survival. He was quiet, obedient, asked no questions, caused no problems. but he was observing everything, learning routines, noting which slaves could be trusted, which overseers were cruel, which brethren members visited regularly, building a mental map of weaknesses. If this story proves how easily evil can hide in plain sight when society protects the powerful, share it with someone who needs to understand that protecting the vulnerable requires constant vigilance. These are not just historical lessons, they are warnings. On June 2nd, the night before his scheduled initiation, Ezekiel lay in his cabin thinking about how far he was willing to go, whether there was any act so terrible that justice did not justify it. He did not have good answers, but he did not need answers, because Catherine had never gone to Philadelphia. She had been hiding in the slave quarters of nearby plantations, speaking to enslaved people she had known her whole life, people who had watched her grow up, who had suffered under her father's ownership, who had lost children to the brethren's rituals, who had watched friends disappear into swamps, and she told them that June 3rd was the night they could end it. The gathering began at midnight. Ezekiel was brought to the cellar by 2 brethren members who stripped him to the waist and tied his hands. They led him down into the candle-lit chamber, where all 13 members waited in their robes. Silas stood at the altar's head. "Brothers of the harvest, tonight we conduct an initiation unlike any in our history. We bring into our circle a man who has every reason to hate us. We do this to prove that our power extends even to our enemies." He gestured, and 2 more members brought forward a figure bound and gagged. A young enslaved woman, maybe 18, terrified. They placed her on the altar. "This is your test, Ezekiel. To join us, you must participate in our ritual. You must take the knife and make the first cut. Prove that your desire for revenge is stronger than your moral objections." The other members began chanting. Silas held out a knife. "Take it. Make the choice." Ezekiel looked at the woman on the altar. He saw every enslaved person who had ever suffered at the hands of people like the brethren. He saw Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He saw himself. He took the knife. The brethren members nodded approvingly. The chanting increased. Ezekiel stepped toward the altar, raised the knife, and then he moved. Not toward the woman, toward the nearest brethren member. The knife flashed in candlelight and buried itself in the man's throat before anyone could react. Blood sprayed. The man collapsed. Chaos erupted. Ezekiel moved through the confusion like violence incarnate. Years of rage focused into action. He fought toward the altar, grabbed the woman, cut her bonds. "Run!" he shouted. She fled up the stairs. He turned back to face 7 remaining brethren members blocking his path. "You have made a terrible mistake," Silas said. "Maybe," Ezekiel replied, "but I will take as many of you with me as I can." What he did not know was that above them, Catherine had returned with 23 enslaved people, men and women armed with tools from the fields, people who had nothing left to lose, people who had lost children to these rituals, who had watched friends disappear, who had endured decades of brutality from men who believed themselves untouchable. When the young woman burst from the cellar screaming, Catherine led them down. The brethren, still trying to subdue Ezekiel, did not hear them coming until it was too late. The enslaved people flooded into the cellar like a tide of rage that had been building for generations. There was no mercy in what followed. These were people who had been told their entire lives they were property, that their suffering did not matter, that their lives had no value. Now they were proving how wrong those beliefs were. The brethren tried to fight. Judge Pelham pulled a pistol, but was struck down before he could fire. Reverend Crenshaw begged for mercy and received none. Marcus Fanning tried to flee up the stairs and was dragged back down. Silas Rutledge, seeing everything collapse, grabbed Catherine with a knife at her throat. Stop or I kill her." The room went still. Catherine looked at her father with no fear in her eyes. "Do it, kill me. It changes nothing. You have already lost. I can still escape. You can still nothing." Catherine's voice was cold as winter. "You spent 16 years trying to break me, trying to make me forget, trying to convince me I was mad. But you failed. I remembered everything, and I am going to watch you die." She drove her elbow back into his ribs with sudden vicious force. His grip loosened. She spun away. And before Silas could recover, Ezekiel was there. They faced each other, the enslaved man and the plantation owner. All the power Silas had held, all the privilege and cruelty, All the years of believing himself untouchable, none of it mattered now. "You took everything from me," Ezekiel said quietly. "My wife, my children, my life. You did it for no reason except that you could, to prove something to men who valued cruelty over humanity." "Please," Silas said. "Just that one word. Did my wife say please? Did my son? Did any of the people you killed in this cellar?" Ezekiel shook his head. "No mercy. Not for you. Not ever." What happened next was brutal and final. The enslaved people made sure none of the brethren survived. 13 men who had believed themselves above consequence learned in their final moments that power was an illusion, that cruelty always came home eventually. When it was over, Catherine stood in the center of the cellar, surrounded by bodies. She was shaking, not from fear but from release. 16 years of rage finally given outlet. Ezekiel came to her. "Are you hurt?" "No, are you?" "Minor cuts. Nothing serious." He looked around at the carnage. "What do we do now?" "Now?" Catherine's smile was grim. "Now we burn it all. The cellar, the ledger, the evidence. We destroy every trace of what happened here tonight. But that evidence could prove what they did, could bring justice." "Justice?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "Ezekiel, this is justice, the only kind we were ever going to get. If we try to take that ledger to authorities, what happens? We are hunted down and killed. Surviving brethren members in other counties come for us. This only ends if everyone believes the Cypress Grove chapter died in an accident." She was right. Then they would burn it all. Then they spent 2 hours preparing. The enslaved people who helped left before dawn, disappearing back to their plantations. They would say nothing. They knew nothing. Catherine and Ezekiel poured oil through the cellar, stacked wood and kindling, placed bodies in positions that might look like an accident. Then they took the ledger and placed it in the center of the altar. "Wait," Ezekiel said. He opened it one last time, found the entries about his family, tore out those pages and folded them carefully. "For them. So they are not forgotten," Catherine nodded. Then she took a candle and held it to the oil-soaked wood. The fire caught immediately. Within minutes, the cellar was ablaze. They fled up the stairs and out of the house, stood in the yard watching as flames engulfed Cypress Grove Plantation. As the sun rose over the burning ruins, Catherine turned to Ezekiel. "What will you do now?" "Go north. Use the chaos to disappear. Maybe find others who want to fight. Create networks that can help people escape. And I will go north as well. Use money I have been stealing from my father's accounts for years. Start over." She paused. "But I will not forget. I will document everything. Write it all down so that someday, somehow, someone knows the truth. They will seal the records. They will seal your testimony too if you try to make it public. Then I will hide it, code it, leave it somewhere to be found decades from now when we are all dead and it cannot hurt us anymore. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. They stayed until the fire burned itself out, until Cypress Grove Plantation was nothing but ash and blackened timbers. Then they walked away in opposite directions. Catherine north toward Charleston, Ezekiel west toward frontier territories where enslaved people could disappear. They never saw each other again. The official story was exactly as they planned. A tragic accident. Silas Rutledge and 12 prominent gentlemen meeting at Cypress Grove when a fire broke out. All 13 perished in the cellar. Terrible loss. Funerals with full honors. Catherine Rutledge was reported to have died in the fire as well. No one questioned it. The enslaved people said nothing. Most were sold within months, scattered across South Carolina and beyond, carrying their secret to their graves. Years passed. The ruins were demolished. Life moved on. But whispers persisted. Stories told in slave quarters about the plantation where masters burned, about the woman and the man who made it happen. The stories became legend, became myth, but the core remained. Cruelty has consequences. Catherine Rutledge's crimes show us how systems of power protect evil until someone inside that system decides enough is enough. The question we must ask ourselves is, how many modern atrocities continue because good people choose comfort over confrontation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What struck you most about this case? Do you believe that journal still exists somewhere? If you believe these suppressed chapters of history need to be told, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Next week, We are investigating the Tuskegee experiments, a case where the US government deliberately infected hundreds of black men with syphilis and studied them for 40 years without treatment, even after penicillin became available, a medical atrocity that authorities tried to bury until a whistleblower exposed everything in 1972. Thank you for bearing witness to this dark chapter of humanity. See you in the next investigation.